There is a whole body of research that's developing in the area of leadership which looks at leadership as a process rather than as a quality that an individual possesses. And I felt that that approach was particularly relevant in the context of professional service firms because it acknowledges that leadership is plural. So leadership is something that happens, in a sense, in the spaces between, in the interactions between individuals. And from that, I developed the concept of the leadership constellation, which is a way of understanding better the underlying power dynamics, the hidden power structures within these kinds of organisations, to find out who the real leaders are, rather than the people who like to think of themselves as leaders. What I've been doing is spending a lot of time getting to know 3 firms really well: the senior leadership group, the key influencers, the power brokers within the firms, understanding how they work together and sometimes how they don't work together very well. It's very difficult to sum up 3 years of work in a series of bullet points. But I believe it boils down to 5 broad themes. And the first of all is the concept of the leadership constellation, understanding that there is an informal power structure that sits alongside and overlaps the formal authority structure. The second broad theme coming out of the research is the power that lies in ambiguity. What my research shows is that ambiguity is something that can be embraced and actively used to your own advantage as a leader, because it can be a source of power for you. The significance of social embeddedness has emerged as another very important theme in my research. High levels of trust can both help and hinder the effective functioning of the leadership dynamics. But in the absence of social embeddedness, the same kind of trust can be manufactured through social control systems. I've also identified the prevalence of politics within these organisations. Ultimately, building consensus in a professional service firm is about bargaining, it's about negotiating, it's about trade-offs, it's about doing deals. These are all political skills. But it's very important that the leaders of these firms appear apolitical, appear to be acting in the best interests of others, which is ultimately the act of a supremely effective politician. And the final theme is the healing power of partnership. Now, this isn't going to happen all the time, but often enough, when things go wrong, new leaders will emerge to take responsibility for repairing the damage, and that is one of the great strengths of a professional service firm.
She takes incredibly complex concepts, huge amounts of research, and she manages to distill it down to 4 or 5 insights, which are really, really powerful.
What really resonated with me about Laura's lecture was the issue of ambiguity in leadership. I've worked both in professional service firms and also in the corporate sector. The corporate sector, there's much less ambiguity between formal power structures and informal power structures. When you're working in professional service firms, they may or may not coincide, and being able to navigate through those more ambiguous power structures is absolutely key.
The one thing that surprised me mostly about Laura's lecture this evening was her discussion about the firm that had both everyone as a leader and no one as a leader. It was an interesting concept. I've seen some of the other stuff before, but that was something new that I hadn't really heard expressed in that particular way.
She has a very subtle and acute ear for the relationships and the language and the personalities involved in these firms. She's been studying them for a long time, of course.
You can draw an organisation chart, but that only gives you part of the story in terms of how a firm is really run. And if you're in management, I think understanding the informal power sources are really, really important.
She has pulled out such explicit information from what is implicit in a professional services practice.
I think I was surprised perhaps by how acute the observations were. And Laura rightly said that it's like holding up a mirror and you look in the mirror and go, oh, is that really what I look like? And I kind of know I do, but I don't necessarily want to admit that to myself. And it did feel a little bit like that, but no, it's a great piece of research.